Yeah, I mean, I think when I was having conversations with friends, with athletes, the first question I always have is, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Because that will necessarily determine, one, which device you want to use, two, which metrics you want to look at, and then three, the manner in which you want to look at them. And so the answers are very different depending on if you want to optimize your performance for, sprinting or endurance or whatever it is, versus like you just want to be able to run around, play with your kids, feel like you have energy. And so I think that's always a starting point. And then beyond that, it sort of directs you to where you want to go. The other thing that I really encourage people to do, which was the process that I went through myself, was to experiment with these devices and to use them as a tool to sort of understand yourself better. And I often think that's almost perhaps the best use case of them right now, to almost be able to draw your attention to how you're actually feeling in the moment. And if you are wearing a device, say, and you use the app and you check it every day, that moment when you check in is almost a nudge for you to do a bit of a body scan and think about, oh, how do I actually feel? And does it line up with what these numbers are telling me? If it does, then great. If it doesn't, then you start to ask yourself some questions of, oh, why is it different? Is it because I did something that the app can't pick up on? Is it because it's telling me something that I haven't actually been able to focus on myself? Is it a new sensation? I need to kind of like spend a bit more time in that body scan. And so I find it useful from that perspective, almost helping you get to know yourself better, rather than almost being overreactive to daily values or daily measures, or even perhaps recommendations that they might give you. And so I always encourage people to think about it more from a longer term perspective of getting to know yourself to enable you to make decisions about yourself, rather than being reactive in the moment to specific values or recommendations.
And so you made quite a few observations on yourself for quite a long period. Was it before you started to publish? Did you sort of have like a period of time where you're actually monitoring, reviewing, keeping an eye on the data and sort of almost looking for the stories from which you could then draw some conclusions?
Yeah, so one of the things I had done, which wasn't intentional at the start, I always realized it when I look back, I had been wearing three different devices at the same time.
How did that go?
It
Was
happened to
that
be over a period of 12 months. At the time, I think people questioned why I was wearing at least two watches, because it was the Apple Watch, the
same
Whoop Band,
same
and
arm, I
then
presume, for
then the Aura
control?
Ring. The Aura Ring and the Whoop Band on the same arm, and then the Apple Watch was on the other arm. I didn't have
Okay.
space on on
Okay.
on the one wrist.
just wrapping them up all up your
Yeah, and then if I would
forearm.
go for a run, I would wear a Garmin or something as well. So, I mean, if you're all, yeah, I just thought let's go all in
Did
on
you have a
this. And
the
so,
sleep headband overnight and a portable ECG?
I mean, sometimes yes, not every day, I would say.
Okay.
But this was this was one of the key points of interest for me to see, like, hey, are these devices all telling me the same thing? And if they're not, which one should I trust, if any of them? And or why might there be differences between them? Is it because they're measuring things a different way? Do they have a different kind of proprietary algorithm? And just wanting to be able to understand them, so that when I was working with athletes or with people who were using them, I would be able to understand the nuances of them and or recommend a certain one depending on what their goals were. So those were really the things I was looking for throughout that process. And I guess some of my first steps were just to almost plot and visualize that data, to start to look for these trends, and also cross-reference what I was seeing in the numbers with some of my personal context and the information that I had about what was going on in my life in those days. And that was one of the reasons I did decide to do it on myself first, because I have all of that context about what I was doing versus trying to measure it on someone else and not necessarily having all of that nuanced information to really understand what was going on. And so that was the process I took, looking for trends, where they were similar, where they were different, and then digging into, if something didn't make sense, why was it that didn't make sense? Could I understand or figure out what was going on? And perhaps a good example there is, there were certain days when I might do a few days of like weight training or high intensity interval type training, and then it would tell me like, oh, you haven't really done very much training, you're good to go, you're well recovered, because a lot of the parameters it was measuring were based on heart rate, and my heart rate hadn't necessarily been getting that high. And I was experiencing delayed onset muscle soreness, but that wasn't something that these devices could measure. So I
Right.
woke up feeling awful, let's say, and they were telling me, oh, you feel great. And it was like, oh, hang on a minute. Like, this is an instance in which I perhaps shouldn't necessarily trust this because it's not measuring all of the parameters. And so it's not giving me a complete picture.